It's Advent, and we're counting down the days toward Christmas, and today we're going to talk about how grumbling points toward Jesus. Well, it's a daily download, and I am glad that you are here today as we're continuing to walk through the Old Testament and look for ways that the stories that we encounter throughout the Old Testament point toward Jesus and his coming as the Messiah. And today we're in the 16th chapter of the book of Exodus. You ever known anybody that just like to gripe a lot? I mean, maybe there's a lot of people in our life that are complainers and grumblers. I've heard people say, you know what, this is the kind of person who would gripe about the price of a free lunch. Or if it were raining soup, they'd be mad they didn't have a fork. Or how about this one? They'd find the dark lining in a silver cloud. Well, all of us know people like that, and maybe sometimes all of us have been people like that. In the 14th chapter of the book of Exodus, we find this big story of the people who have been released from Egypt. They're leaving and they're heading toward the promised land when Pharaoh decides to chase after them. Maybe you remember this story. They're cornered. Pharaoh and his army is behind them as they look forward. They got the Red Sea in front of them. There's no way out. And then God parts the Red Sea and they go through on dry land and they're saved. And the water collapses around Pharaoh and his army and they're rescued. And now they're on their way to the promised land. Fast forward only 2 chapters, the 16th chapter of the book of Exodus. And what we find there is this: then when the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and they journeyed in the wilderness of Sin between Elim and Mount Sinai, they arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. And there too, the whole community of Israel complained to Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. Then we sat around our pots and we were filled with meat and we ate all the bread we wanted. But now you brought us into the wilderness to starve us all to death. Wah! It's crazy, isn't it? I mean, just a couple of days earlier, God was saving them from like the most dire situation. And now a few days later, they're complaining and grumbling. And so it is with them. It happens over and over and over again with these people. God delivers them. He provides a miracle and they gripe and they grumble. The fact is, we human beings seem prone to grumble, and maybe for good reason. This world is not perfect. It is broken. The universe is not as it's supposed to be. And there's always going to be problems and things that are never quite right. Our sense that things ought to be better than they are, that things ought to be stronger than they are, that things ought to be cleaner and clearer, and in our lives things ought to work out differently than they do, is really a point to the fact that God has put eternity in our hearts. We all know that we've been created for heaven, and this world is not our home. And no matter how well things are going, they're never quite right. They're certainly never perfect, and they aren't heaven. You and I long for heaven because we've been created for heaven. And in this world, we long for something better. And that longing in the Old Testament, and even the longing we now feel for heaven when this life is over with, points us toward Jesus. Jesus was going to come to be the fulfillment of Scripture. He was the one the prophets had declared would eventually make things right. And with his coming, we know a right relationship with God, and we are promised heaven when this life is over with. The next time you hear somebody grumbling or complaining, especially during this Christmas season, be reminded that that grumbling and complaining in some way is an echo of our heart for heaven. We're not satisfied with this world because this world is not our eventual home. I hope you're enjoying counting down toward Christmas with your family right now and that you have a wonderful day. Maybe the next time you're tempted to grumble and complain, maybe be reminded that it's just an echo of the heaven that is coming, that we ought to be a kind of people that look toward heaven with a positive spirit and recognize that, of course, this world is never going to be all that our hearts long for. I love you guys. Have a wonderful day today. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow.